Welcome to the deep dive. We take research, articles, source materials, and try to, well, distill them down into the key insights. Today, we're getting into something really core to, the human experience, duty and loyalty. It's complex. I was actually watching this miniseries, Designated Survivor,
Oh, yeah.
and there's this scene, these Navy SEALs, they're back from this incredibly dangerous mission, miss family stuff, risk their lives. And when someone thanks them, they just say, basically, it was our duty performed in loyalty to the country. Simple, powerful.
Mm-hmm. That kind of conviction, you respect that instinctively.
Exactly. But then, you turn on the news or read reports and you see what our source material calls these increasing decibels of vocal views, these aggressive demonstrations.
All right. Intense passion on display.
And often that passion also comes from a sincere sense of duty and loyalty, just to completely different opposing causes. So it makes you stop and think, doesn't it? How can these things, duty, loyalty, things we generally see as virtues, lead to such conflict, such sometimes destructive ends throughout history?
That's the crux of it, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
The very things we often admire most, that sense of duty, that deep loyalty, they throw up this fundamental philosophical question about human nature, really, and how societies hold together or don't.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to dive into our source for today, Duty and Loyalty to the Cause.pdf. We want to explore the nuances, understand the potential for good and ill, and maybe, just maybe, find a different angle on finding common ground.
Precisely. And by the end of this deep dive, hopefully you'll have a clearer picture of why these convictions clash so hard, why finding common ground is so tough, and maybe, yeah, a new way to think about your own sense of duty. Okay, let's get into it. That designated survivor example, the SEAL's response, it's almost like a pure distillation of duty and loyalty, right?
It is. Very clear cut.
And the source points out, look, many deeply held views, even the ones that seem completely opposed, often spring from that exact same place, a deep sense of obligation to some cause. This is where it gets really interesting, I think. Whether you're talking military, political activism, social causes, the source argues people are often driven by this powerful feeling of, I have to do this.
It's true. And the source lays out this spectrum of how people see duty and loyalty. It's not uniform at all. On one side, many see them as just paramount virtues, essential, can't function without them.
The default view, maybe.
Perhaps, but then you have others who are deeply suspicious. They see it as, quote, evidence of unthinking subservience to authority. Blind following, basically.
Okay, so a real divide.
Definitely. And what's fascinating is the source notes, even groups like anarchists who you'd think reject all authority, they still talk about needing group cohesion or voluntary acceptance of principles. They still expect, in their own way, duty and loyalty to the cause. Now, the source says it might be narrowly defined, maybe even bordering on the selfish sometimes.
Right.
But that core idea of allegiance, of being committed to the group's aims, it's still there.
So it seems like no matter how you slice it or what the cause is, the source is saying this idea, this notion of duty and loyalty, it's generally seen as worthy and favorable, something you want in the members of your group, whatever that group is.
Exactly. Which brings us right back to that big question. If everyone values these attributes, why do they seem to cause so much trouble, so much conflict and division?
That is the paradox, isn't it? The absolute core of it. How can something we label good, duty, loyalty end up producing so much? Well, the source uses the word evil, so much destruction.
Yeah.
And history just provides example after example. The source mentions the unquestioned Nazis' loyalty to Hitler, a chilling example.
Absolutely.
Or think about the Inquisitors. The source says they sincerely believed that they were protecting the masses from the ills of the heretics. They thought they were doing God's work, fulfilling a duty.
That sincerity is key. They weren't necessarily thinking, I'm doing evil. They were acting out of conviction.
And it's not ancient history either. The source points to, modern extremist groups trying to protect their countries and values. Their motivation, from their perspective, is often duty and loyalty.
Right. Or on the other side, potentially, ultra-liberal groups bent on forcing the rest of society onto their vision of the paths to progress. Again, driven by a conviction that their way is the right way out of a perceived duty.
It really shows how intense that drive can be, and how it can completely blind people to other perspectives.
And that's why the source warns against being too quick to judge the motivation even when we condemn the actions. It says, an objective observer would have to acknowledge that many members of these groups are marching sincerely and passionately to their own drums.
So just calling them extremist or radical doesn't really help us understand why it's happening.
Exactly. The source calls it naive to just dismiss the passion. The real challenge, the dilemma, is how do you reconcile or balance these sincere but strongly and divergently opposed views. That difficulty, that near impossibility sometimes, explains, as the source puts it, so much confusion on Earth. We can't just write off opposing views. We have to grapple with the fact that sincere conviction drives them, even if we fundamentally disagree.
Thinking about those inquisitors, believing they were protecting people, it really forces you to check your own assumptions about people you disagree with. It's not easy.
Not at all.
Which leads us perfectly into this whole search for common ground. Why is it so darn elusive? The source mentions this simple-minded idea, if only everyone shared a common goal.
Right, the utopian dream.
But then the more sophisticated perspective often scoffs at that, points to things like the struggles of the United Nations trying to keep peace or the whole Brexit drama. See?
It's impossible.
Yeah, Exhibit A, Exhibit B.
So what's wrong with that sophisticated dismissal? Is it missing something? Well, the source argues it kind of misses the point, the spirit behind the simple idea.
Yeah.
That simple idea assumes we can actually see and share a common cause, that it's possible to find a foundation. And, the idea that no person is an island, as the poet said. It's true, isn't it? The source talks about our numerous bonds of interdependence.
We see them everywhere. Global economy, environment, pandemics. We're all linked.
Exactly. So the critical question the source poses is, if we are all interdependent, why can't we seem to use that as a basis for finding common ground? Why does it break down so often?
Okay, so why? What's the source's explanation?
It suggests the problem lies in how we've defined these bonds for millennia, purely from a human perspective. That focus, it argues, has been misplaced.
Misplaced how?
Because when we only look at it human to human, our efforts inevitably become narrowed and contaminated by myopic views. Everyone focuses on their group, their cause, their interpretation of interdependence.
Which leads straight back to those divergently opposing causes, everyone pulling in different directions based on their limited view.
Precisely. It's like,
Right.
yeah, like we're all looking at our own little piece of the puzzle and insisting it's the whole picture.
It feels like that sometimes. So what's the alternative the source hints at?
It poses a really interesting question. What if, it says, drawing on ancient wisdom, we focused not on the human perspective on the bonds of interdependence, but looked instead for the causal source of this independence?
The causal source, meaning something beyond just us.
That seems to be the implication, looking for the root, not just the branches.
Okay, sticking with things we might be missing, the source brings up another puzzle. The golden rules.
Sure. Do unto others.
Right. Christianity has do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Buddhism, hurt not others in ways that you yourself would find hurtful. Islam, no one of you is a believer until he desires for his brother that which he desires for himself.
And Confucianism, Hinduism, Judaism, Taoism, Zoroastrianism, they all have similar core principles. Treat others with consideration.
Exactly. These profound ethical guides are almost universal. Yet, the source points out, look around. The earth is still sorely troubled by violent and conflicting convictions. So, why haven't these golden rules worked? Why haven't they brought peace?
That is a massive riddle, isn't it? And our source offers a pretty startling answer, drawing again from this thinker, Abdru Shin.
Okay, what's the answer?
Abdru Shin's insight as presented is this: make everything you think and do into a service to God.
A service to God. Okay. What does that mean in this context?
The implication, according to the source, is huge. It suggests that only the recognition of our responsibility to God will enable us to pursue actions that will be truly developed on the God-willed common ground.
So it's shifting the focus of our duty, not just loyalty to country or cause or even humanity, but to something higher.
Exactly. It moves accountability beyond the purely human level. The idea connecting it back is that true common ground, the kind that overcomes those narrow human perspectives, can only really emerge when we align with a universal and divine perspective rather than our fragmented human ones.
That's a really big idea, a fundamental shift in perspective. But for listeners who maybe aren't coming from a specific religious background, how does the source suggest this God-willed common ground could be understood? Is it purely theological?
That's a fair question. And reading between the lines, the emphasis seems less on specific religious dogma and more on aligning with what could be seen as, well, fundamental laws of existence, universal principles, things like inherent interconnectedness, selfless service, acting for the benefit of the whole rather than just the self or the immediate group. You could perhaps frame it as aligning with natural law or universal ethics rather than solely a specific deity.
So the principle of looking beyond the purely human perspective is key. regardless of the label.
That seems to be the core idea presented. It's about cultivating an inner conviction that resonates with these broader, perhaps inherent, principles of constructive existence.
Okay, and Abrushin, according to the source, takes this further, looking at conviction and consequence, particularly around sacrifice.
Yes, he apparently makes a very sharp distinction. The source quotes him defining genuine value and sacrifice as occurring only when conviction harmonizes with duty. You have to truly believe in what you're doing, not just follow orders.
Okay, conviction and duty. What if you have duty without conviction?
Well, here comes the stark warning. The source quotes Abdurushin saying if someone only risks his life in the fulfillment of duty without conviction, they degrade themselves to the position of a mercenary.
A mercenary. Someone just doing it for pay or obligation without inner belief?
Right, and then the really strong conclusion from Abdurushin, fighting of that kind thus becomes murder.
Wow, murder. That's an incredibly strong language.
It is. And the source underlines that murder is seen as a grievous crime with no extenuating circumstances. So the implication is acting out of duty, but without that inner harmonizing conviction carries profound consequences, far beyond just the physical act.
But what about conflicts that aren't, physical, like damaging reputation, spreading rumors, that kind of thing? Does that logic apply?
That's a great point. The source explicitly states this strong admonition isn't limited to physical violence. It extends to bloodless conflicts that result in, quote, damaged reputations, insinuations, and slander. It ties this into broader ethical interpretations, like Abdurushin's expanded view of commandments against killing and bearing false witness, suggesting harm can be inflicted in many ways.
So it really broadens the scope of responsibility for our actions, even our words, when driven by duty or loyalty.
Absolutely. It raises serious questions about the true weight of our actions, even nonviolent ones, when they stem from this place.
And this idea of responsibility, it goes even deeper, doesn't it? The source talks about contributory responsibility for the long-run changes to society. It gives the example of the struggle for freedom of choice and expression. We fight for these things based on conviction, but the full consequences, good and bad, might only become clear much later, slowly emerging.
Exactly. We set things in motion, often with the best intentions, driven by a duty to a cause, but the ripple effects can be vast and unforeseen in our lifetime.
So what's Abdurushin's take on that, according to the source, this long-term impact?
Well, this is where it gets really profound and perhaps controversial for some. The source explains Abdurushin's perspective based on the law of creation, suggesting that individuals will also be drawn back to reincarnate on Earth in order to experience the societal changes that they contributed to create.
Drawn back to experience what they helped create.
Yes. The source gives a striking example. Imagine someone who, out of loyalty to their social class perhaps, strongly supported human slavery in one life.
Okay.
Then, in a future life, according to this view, they might reincarnate into circumstances where their spirit experiences the effects of that very system they helped uphold.
So cause and effect across lifetimes.
That's the idea presented. It's framed not as some fanciful flight of imagination, but as the working of a natural law, the law of action and reaction, or karma. Consequences follow, whether in this life, the next, or upon reincarnation.
And the source mentions Abdurushin's book, Questions and Answers, has more examples of this.
Correct. It's presented as a fundamental mechanism of existence. Our duties, our loyalties, the societal changes we fuel, they create ripples that we ourselves will eventually encounter. It adds a whole other dimension to the weight of our convictions.
Wow. Okay. That is a lot to think about. We've really covered some ground here. We started questioning that paradox, good intentions, bad outcomes, explored why sincere convictions divide us. Then we found this perspective on maybe finding common ground by looking beyond the purely human towards a higher source or principle. And finally, landing on these incredibly far-reaching consequences of our actions driven by duty and loyalty, potentially even spanning lifetimes. It definitely feels like our usual understanding is just, scratching the surface.
I agree. And the source material itself really encourages that deeper look. It invites the curious or interested reader to explore the mentioned works, like Abdurushin's, to gain a greater appreciation of an ennobled concept of duty and loyalty. It suggests that the serious seeker can find answers by really engaging with the material, studying it, weighing each sentence, and crucially, finding the confirmation of what has been said in life itself. It's not just abstract theory, it's meant to be observable.
An invitation to a personal investigation, really.
Exactly.
So let's leave our listeners with a final thought to chew on, building on that last profound point. If, as this perspective suggests, we are truly bound to experience the long-term societal shifts that our loyalties and duties help create, then what kind of world are you helping to build right now? And what future might you be shaping, not just for society, but perhaps for your own future experiences, maybe even across lifetimes, by the causes you choose to embrace today?